It's not good. Slide. We have the slide. It's not working. Okay. Are you recording? Are you transmitting and recording? Yes. Good afternoon. Good afternoon to those of us here in Harare. Good morning to those further to the west, and good evening to those in the east. You are very welcome to our final roundtable of our summer school, which started on Monday and concludes today. We have been through a week of great discussions, presentations of papers, lots of new ideas that have come through. And there could not be a better topic today than the issue of international solidarity 7 years after Bandung, to bring to an end, to a close this long week. We are actually at 69 years after Bandung. We will be celebrating Bandung next year. That will be the 70th anniversary of Bandung. And to that effect, we are, in a sense, building up towards the celebration so that we can gather some reflections together and allow our thinking to mature for the celebration itself. We also made a decision, the Agrarian South Network Coordinating Committee this week, regarding the topic, the theme of next year's summer school. We don't have yet a complete title. We will develop that very soon. But it will be focused on issues of sovereignty and solidarity today. We can guarantee you that much for now. I will just put in, my name is Larry Sierros. I will be chairing this panel. With me, I have Sandeep Tatra from India, from CARES, which is the host institution of our journal, Agrarian South, Journal of Political Economy, and is also the director of Action Aid in India. To my left is Marcelo Rosa from the Federal Rural University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, who both of them have been, in fact, founding members of this network. And to my far left is Max Ayo, who is currently at Ghent University in Belgium, and also at the Center, there's an acronym in French, but it's the Center for Environmental Sovereignty, Food Sovereignty in Tunis. Welcome to you all. Thank you for being here. And there's also, is Archana logged on? Archana?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, and with us in New Delhi, we have our comrade, dear comrade Archana Prasad, who is a professor in the Center of Labor and Informal Studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University of New Delhi. We are very pleased that you managed to be with us, Archana, at least at a distance. We miss you very much. We wish you could be here with us today, physically, but nonetheless, we are very pleased that you will contribute to our discussion, given that you are also a pillar of this network in the coordinating committee. Now, I will just give my 2 cents into the introductory manner. Bandung, the meeting in Bandung is of great importance for the 20th century at least, and in my view, its legacy persists to this day. It was an earthquake, a political earthquake in world affairs, where for the first time, nations, independent nations in the South, after 500 years of European colonialism, gained their independence and came together in the city of Bandung to carve out an understanding and a strategy on how to transform North-South relations in a more peaceful and equitable manner. It was an Afro-Asian meeting initially, with other observer delegations from Latin America, for example, but Latin America itself did not have formal participation. That was Bandung itself. Its principles were South-South cooperation in the technological field, in the cultural field, development, coordination for development, and world peace. Bandung was a peace movement at that stage. It emphasized international law, resolution of conflict through international law. That was its contribution in this novelty at that time, when imperialism would persist in its own ways of imposing its own will in its expansion around the world. The spirit of Bandung took various concrete forms thereafter. The non-aligned movement was born 6 years later. This was an alliance of states outside the UN system to establish a third voice of the third world outside the competition between the Soviet Union and the United States, the West in general. It established some principles. It took forward some of the principles of Bandung, especially in issues of non-alignment, which was not only an ideological principle for the third world to have its own voice, but also a practical principle in the preservation of smaller, weaker states emerging out of colonialism, who could become the victims of retaliation, especially from the United States, if they would align themselves in military blocs, at least, with the Soviet Union. In this process of the building of the development of the spirit of Bandung, Latin America joined in, especially in the Tricontinental, which was held in Cuba another 6 years later, and which is where the Latin America came in with force and organized a Tricontinental Conference, which at that stage brought together a more radicalized version of Bandung. This was already the mid-60s, the point of armed struggles, which were exploding, breaking out around the world. Other formations which followed in this spirit was the G77, now within the United Nations, which today continues its legacy, and which met last year, in fact, in Havana, once again, in the G77 plus China, a major event. The Bandung experience went into a period, passed through a period of crisis, a long period of crisis. There was a reversal of fortunes in the 1970s through the debt crisis, despite the fact that imperialism itself was in crisis, had been defeated in Vietnam, and was in fact in an economic crisis. Nonetheless, the protagonism in the setting of the agenda in world affairs was taken once again, was usurped by the North, and from then on, a new order was established, which did not knock down, did not suppress the gains, did not manage to suppress the gains of decolonization, in the sense that a new global national sovereignty regime was established, but nonetheless, the protagonism was taken from the third world, and we entered a period of neoliberal reversals. The trajectories of states since then have been very diverse. Some states have periodically, we have states that have collapsed, they're invaded. This is a real phenomenon over this long period. Other states have gone through a process of emergence, which has been unstable, with the exception, of course, of China. And other states have gone through a process of radicalization. If we think of Venezuela, in Latin America, Zimbabwe here, in a number of others. Social movements have also emerged in their own right, apart from the traditional political parties. This is a phenomenon of this period, this late period, since the 1980s. The struggles of the past were led either by national liberation movements and or communist movements. The new phase gave birth to social movements quite separate from party politics, even if aligned to particular parties. This is also the period of the NGOization of politics, of civil society organizations, which itself has become a reality in any discussion of international solidarity today. At the same time, and I will conclude with this before I pass on to our comrades here, we do have a new type of, I would say, social formation in all across the regions of the South. New types of societies and their social structures have emerged after this long period of neoliberalism. And the social struggles which emerge from these social structures are quite distinct in many ways. And this is really the something that we need to take into consideration in our discussions on international solidarity. The genocide in Palestine is a dramatic and tragic moment of this late phase of neocolonialism. We had written a paper with Sam Moyo and Praveen Jha 10 years ago, where we had said that genocide is on the agenda of the 21st century. And indeed, today, it is true. Unfortunately, it has happened. Genocide is ongoing in Palestine, in broad daylight, in front of our eyes, a declared ethnic cleansing in a settler colonial situation. And I wish to take this opportunity to extend our solidarity to the Palestinian people who are struggling for their independence and their existence, and denounce with them the genocide of the Zionist state. And with that, I will pass, I think I will start to my right then. Is that okay? Archana had requested that she came last, so we can start here and then pass on the end to Archana. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paris. Thank you, the panelists. Welcome to all. Allow me first to locate my reflections on the context set by Paris. I am talking of India, and from India, a state, one of the leaders of the Bandung. So when you say 70 years, 69 years post Bandung, the question bites me to look at where we are 70 years, 69 years towards Bandung in that quest for international solidarity. So that's one location I want to reflect. The second is the work that I serve that has introduced me with CARES, but also with Action Aid Association. It covers, and I'm going to read what I've written, covers essentially it's a groundwork. So I'm going to locate my reflections from that perspective. I'll give you a brief on how my thoughts are framed, basis of the day-to-day work one is involved with. This work essentially are collective grounded efforts for about 10,000 human rights defenders. We call them social justice and human rights defenders in our jargon. You can call them cadres, you can call them activists. We call it for our security reasons. In about, if not all of those districts, full of those districts, the entire area of the districts, about 300 districts of the country, covering 25 states. To give you a context, India is 700 plus districts, so about half the country, but spread around across diversities. These human rights defenders, the 10,000 of them that I speak to, are active today, have been for some time, have many of them, not all, have been through what internally we call cadre schools, but on paper we call them leadership schools in order to save our skins from the state. And a large part of our work is essentially, I will come to, is mobilizing, serving political education. I'm using those words carefully. Organizing or collectivizing, if you may call it, in different types of formations. Where possible, unionizing, where not possible, building farmer, producer type of these new formula organizations, take the benefit of entitlements from the state. These are largely what in India are called the informers of the world, the informers of India, the working people of India in our language. And also increasingly, what Paris you defined on the opening session here, and we see it on the ground any which way, the out of work people. Call it surplus, but call it surplus plus plus plus. The refugees, the ex-criminal tribes of India, and their numbers are huge. The Dalits, and among the lowest caste groups, the most dispossessed, the ones we were talking the other day, the ones who are condemned to eating nothing but rats because they can't afford any other meals. Like that, one can go on and on. And I read that list. The bonded workers, the out of work. So the slave labor in our country, it's called bondage, bonded work, where you are unfree work and you're not paid wages, probably some food. Among the others, the groups we work with are landless agricultural workers, and these are essentially either Dalit communities, the scheduled caste communities, as is called in official jargon, the tribal communities, the sharecroppers among them, the bonded workers among them, the women, cutting across all that, but also specifically the women in domestic work, serving others, washing utensils for others, doing cooking for others on meager wages, sanitation workers, rural and urban, including the manual scavengers, those who carry headloads of shit for others in rural areas primarily, the fisher folk, the pastoral people, the ex-criminal tribes, as I said, construction workers, and then a whole range of refugees, Rohingyas, Chinns, Tamils, Afghans, a whole range of them. Gig workers, the newer forms of work, so to say, platform and gig workers, service workers in cities, the waste pickers, the homeless people, and the street vendors. The numbers run into millions. The work expanse runs into millions to organize. And the main expressions of solidarity building, and I'm going to reflect from there. The main expressions for solidarity building in this effort are through the follows. First, building platforms. Paris referred to social movements, but I'm not going to just be limiting there. Building platforms to cross identities. So building platforms of, let's say, the biggest platform in India, one of the biggest ones is the Working People's Coalition, which brings together different types of groups, unions, collectives of informal workers across different parts of India. So platforms across beyond identities, if I may say that, and sometimes on identities. Like the largest platform of young Muslim women in India, the Bharatiya Muslim Mahila Andolana. Basically, it means the Muslim women's struggle. That's how I call it. And like that, the unions, such as the domestic workers unions, which we have registered, construction workers unions, and then of course the newer forms, the farmer producer, women farmer producer kind of organizations. Now, these organizations, of course, through the process of mobilization and campaigns. Now, these are done through the process of political education. One among the principles, most important perhaps to reflect on later on, is a question of what we call the father schools, the leadership schools, as hubs for serving out, dishing out politics, political education, progressive thinking, tools, laws, so a whole range of things. These are done through what we call, in our internal terrain, the social movement and cadre building schools. These are not somewhere sitting in Delhi or some other state capital. These are located in the blocks of the districts that I spoke of. Blocks are sub-constituents of districts of India. The second is, of course, to build organizations that I've said. The third around that is researches. A range of ground researches are produced, a basis of ongoing needs on the ground. These may vary. The latest one, for instance, is the question of livelihood of refugees, the education of refugees, and the health status of refugees, because they want to articulate those. But not long ago, some months ago, was the impact of climate on all of these groups, particularly the front-end groups, the ones which interface with nature. We ran a range of studies with colleagues here around agrarian issues, agrarian crisis, around social security, around informal work. So research is another big area of work. And then finally, to come to that, aligning this with the larger processes, progressive processes. These may be left unions, so aligning these formations, this is their choice. Of course, it's inevitable, with more progressive processes, larger parties, perhaps, other unions, and other progressive platform processes. So this is what I wanted to say quickly about the location of the book. A few reflections that I have basis of this, and which talk to the issues that you outlined, but also are directly linked to what we are discussing today. First of all, what I see the main issue, and this is over 20 years, 30 years, and increasingly so, is the one for survival, particularly those who have been forced out of work. It's an immense struggle for basic survival. Survival is a very wide word, but let me limit it to very, very basic survival. And particularly even as new social formations, which we have been discussing here, emerge, out of work category emerges, different types of mobile populations emerge. The need is so acute that even basic handouts, basic food, basic meals, basic shelter items are enough. It is at that level of criticality across the groups that I am speaking of. And indeed, it is a political question of survival, and therefore a compulsion for these groups to follow. An inch of wage, a small handout, a hope, and a mirage offered by anybody. So let me begin there. So a quest for survival, a compulsion to depend, and a compulsion to follow anybody who does it. Not a choice. Second, I want to say that antagonisms are increased tremendously, particularly in the last 10 years, antagonisms among the groups, among and within the working class groups. And I'll give a lot of examples if you wish, but few here for sure. have across the social formations and within the social formations are growing stronger and are articulated through historically have been articulated. So they are not new forms of articulation, but they're exaggerated now: caste, gender, nativity, what I would call where you are located, and more importantly for in the Indian context, and I think it's more generalizable across religion. So it's a devil which seems to have been unchained. And that is one of the strongest forms of articulation of these antagonisms as we are talking about. I also want to say that there is enough data on ground to see this. I want to refer to two such quick experiences. One, the rise of atrocities and physical violence. This is something that ActionAid Association has compared across a period of 12 years. 2004, our first national study on untouchability in rural India, published by Penguin, read it. And the next, 2016, or 8 years ago, our study in those same very 500 villages on untouchability in rural India. And the key difference that we find in those 12 years, comparing the same people and the same set of issues on untouchability, is the tremendous rise in levels of extreme atrocities, killings, violence, and what is called caste atrocities in our country. There has been a fall in what's called softer forms of untouchability, the double glass system that if I have a Dalit, I did this, if you have a caste, you did this, we don't mix, intermarriages and so forth is a long dream. That's one experience. Second is ActionAid Association, among things I didn't say. There's a lot of other things, but one of the things we do is to run one-stop crisis centers for women. We run two of them in the central Indian city of Bhopal. And these have been run for the last 12 years, last 9 years continuously. What do? They provide medical support to battered women, to burnt women, to raped women, to cut women. What do? They provide legal support in one place. Third, what do? They provide food and what is called short-term stay. Counseling, of course, is inbuilt into these. And what do we see in these 9 years across these? First, the numbers of people coming to those shelters is not just a matter of publicity or people are more aware, but this is run with the state. This is not one NGO activity. We lead it with the central central state government of Madhya Pradesh. The numbers have increased tremendously. The levels of violence have increased. This is data over secret. It's not public, but it's our data over 9 years. On an average, we are getting in those overflowing in those two centers, roughly about 4,000 to 5,000 cases per month of extremely battered women. Second, what do we see? The age is going down. So we would get middle-aged, sort of younger women. You now get more and more children. Girls, 3 years, 5 years have been raped. Girls who've been cut and bruised, who are 5 years, 7 years, 8 years old. This is an example to tell you how these antagonists, and who are these girls? And who are these women? These are women from the groups I'm speaking to, or I have spoken of. So that's what I wanted to say. Then I want to say something else. Now you look at the antagonisms, for instance, third example, what's happening between the indigenous people and what's called the upper caste groups, the Meiteis in Manipur. For the last 1 year, there have, I think, about 2,000 people been killed. And that's both the level of violence, killing, and hatred among groups which were cohabitating across the axis of caste and tribe are huge, and it's still not been contained by the state. I want to then say that the issue of socialization and the issue of political education, this is what we see, has become stronger. And you worry why it's become stronger and wonder why it's become stronger, because the general thing is it's become weaker. But this has become stronger on the fascist right. The spaces for socialization and the schools, children's schools where socialization and political education begins, the youth clubs, the social spaces such as marriage, death ceremonies, that cradle to a grave kind of space where people go, are increasingly and have tremendously, not increasingly, tremendously been occupied by fascist, populist, right-wing ideas of what the world should look like. And at the same time, those very spaces of socialization, which were once social democratic, liberal in our context, or more importantly, left bastions, apart from some limited geographies of India. Those who are aware of India, the left bastions and therefore the left push for spaces, the left occupation of spaces of socialization is relatively higher in a couple of states like Kerala. Used to be in West Bengal, they've lost it, are not there. So, and therefore, the right wing has filled up that space aggressively on pitched battles on the ground and in cases where there are vacuums. Then I want to say that the new social formations, the hegemony over the new social, what's the worrying part here and what's the big problem to solidarity is that the hegemony over the new social formations, over the groups that I've spoken of, street vendors of India, the criminalized tribes of India, the lowest among the Dalits, the ones who burn bodies, for instance, the domes of India, many other such examples that can go on, except the Muslim refugees, are all taken over by the exercise. That hegemony is exercised by the right wing, and through the capture of the state. Since the state is captured, you can give handouts, you can give small handouts. So that's a big issue that we have. The left, the so-called democratic space, the liberals, and the social movements, and the ability of the movements, and all of our progressive sort of coalition is weakening in general. There have, of course, needless to say, few very strong assertions. The farmers' movement of India, but these are very few. I have their own internal contradictions. I don't have time to get into. But I mean, these are just beacons of hope, and much more is needed. If you look at the data on membership of trade unions, progressive trade unions, if you look at the data on membership of progressive political parties, that data would worry or would be a cause of concern as to what's really happening with reference to the best expressions that a Bandung-like international solidarity would need from within countries. I want to say that NGOs do not count. You may argue that they never counted in the task. I belong to one. You may argue that they never counted in a task of liberation. But let me take the argument further and say they do not count at all. That is partly because there have been recent changes in the law, but more than law, the weaponization of the law to ensure that the small NGOs of India, those you may argue were doing some social service to disadvantaged groups, have all vanished. They have all vanished because there is no small resources even available to them. Even the large ones have vanished from the ecosystem of India. Oxfam, to take an example, was doing some social service, one may argue. Today, Oxfam has no persons, no people, no money, no staff. So it's zero. So the NGOs do not count at this point. There are a few who may do a few things. Therefore, the movement expressions are also aggressively being stymied. I'm not sounding pessimistic. I'm just telling you the facts as they are on the ground. So reclaiming this state, therefore, is our key task. It remains our key task. But if without sounding preposterous, let me say reclaiming the society also becomes an important agenda for us as far as the future of solidarity and building of solidarity goes. The key tasks and the key opportunities therefore for us, 70 years after Bandung, and the state of sovereignty, which at best I would call in India a degraded one in your schema of things, is to set up opportunities and convergence points to produce, to inculcate, to mentor, to support, to enable fly leadership for social progress. To me, therefore, it needs to transcend what's also happened is identity-based formations have grown. That task also needs to transcend the identity-based formations, the caste identity-based formation, the indigeneity identity-based formations. They need to transcend beyond that. And for that, I think one key issue is the need for political education process. One cannot emphasize it more at the local and at the sub-national levels. Charter schools, example I was giving. Second, I want to say that at the more sub-regional Asia or global level, the question of solidarity, the institutions and organizations which enable expressions of solidarity also become crucial in this task, in this endeavor that we have. The reason why Paris we joined ASN, are with ASN, is that reason. The purpose of politicization, but also the purpose of that solidarity building. But I think more and more such institutions are very, very few at this moment. But many, many more such formations are needed. And there's a room in that space. Finally, I want to lastly end with this whole question that equally important is the radical exercise of rejuvenating the political parties, the progressive political parties. One has possibly in the question answer session, or perhaps Archana is speaking to it. It's a debatable issue, but at the very local level and perhaps continentally too, there was a history of Pan-Africanist political parties. Asia never had such history. So locally and perhaps continentally and beyond, one does need to have that rejuvenation through foot soldiers, through organizers, and this is a fundamental task, a far fundamental task, therefore, as larger sort of people's processes, is to build those people who can further build people-to-people, worker-to-worker solidarity and a political understanding. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sandeep. You have really illuminated with such clarity the current situation in India and the work that the organization has been doing. You brought a great wealth of insight and detail to our discussion, which is very important for the very enriching debates. Thank you. The next is Marcelo Rosa. Just for those who came in a bit late, we have 4 panelists. Jan Sandeep, Marcelo, Max, Narchana, Prasad, who is on Zoom with us. Okay.
Thank you, Paris. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, just to be sure, it's a pleasure to be here at the summer school. And I would like to extend my solidarities to all the Ismail's colleagues who are here and are making this encounter possible and this meeting work. So thank you very much. And of course, I would like to thank Paris for the idea of this panel. And I think to begin Paris has been very strong in inserting this debate on international solidarity among us. And so thank you for helping us to think and sometimes, like in my case, forcing us to think about some issues that we sometimes avoid. And I'll try to give my short collaboration to this debate. And I must say it to be a very skeptical one. But with some possibilities I've been dealing with in the last few years. But the first thing I would like to say, and when we talk about solidarity, and contrary to what our friend Jay Atigosh told us the other day, I don't think that necessity is the mother of solidarity, or I don't think we should take it seriously in a way to go a bit further. And of course, I come from the field of social movement studies, and this was a very basic debate, late 70s, beginning of the 80s. It's not because people suffer that they organize. And of course, there are, as we have heard from Sandeep, from Paris, there's a lot of suffering in the world. A lot of people under different kinds of scarcities, but it doesn't mean the scarcities will lead them to transform the world, to revolt, and basically to organize. Coming from the area of social movements, and I did a lot of research on the landless movements in different parts of the world, we have landless everywhere. But we have very few organizations, and we have very few revolts compared to the land scarcity all over the world. And the way, of course, under the capitalist development and its relation to land. So my contribution today, and I aim to be very short, is skeptical in a sense that I'll try to highlight some of the limits of the solidarities, and I will try to push us for a certain sort of agenda in the Grand South network. And of course, coming from an academic position, it will always be a research agenda from my point of view. A bit different from what Sandeep has offered us. That's the good thing of the panel. We have different perspectives, and it will also be somehow limited to the short, medium term perspective. So, and limited to the global South. First of all, I will avoid the analysis, the analysis of the international relations order, and the solidarities that can be built in that. What can I say? From that perspective, because that's not my area of research. So I try to bring some of my own themes to the table, and going down to the research level and the sociological perspectives I've been dealing with in the last few years. One of the main problems we have to deal with is that, and later we will get to the problem of the social formations, but when we conduct our political analysis, most of the time we are still limited by the duality state-civil society. In most of the cases, this is the dual perspective we have developed, and there's also always, and we got to learn that it's not because it's civil society that's nice, and the NGOs are the best example of these things, and not nice in this, but nice in terms of being promising of change, and of course changing the way we think. So taking into account that we didn't go any further of this state civil society perspectives. My own perspective here will not be on the side of the state, but it's very important, as we have been seeing here, and I think Paris was mentioned at the beginning, we must take into account the changes especially within nation states and the instabilities of the nation states all over the region. We cannot think about solidarities without thinking that we have instabilities everywhere, and in each of the three continents, and it has been renovated every decade after decade. So, and from this, my own perspective, the state level, in our case of the Global South, a few years ago, a decade ago or so, then we began with this whole thing on the BRICS that we got now to realize it doesn't change much. Actually, in my perspective, it doesn't do anything different than what we had before. But at the same time, as I think all of us will mention here, the Palestine crisis at the moment and the war against Palestine is a matter of hope that we should take into account. But again, it's related to many other things, and the solidarity that have been built around this. We must take it seriously, but you must think on how to take it further. But that's not my point for today. I'm much more in the social movements, civil society side of the coin. But what's the problem with this? And then I come to what Paris has presented us the other day, as that what kind of social formations we have to think about social movements. And one of the things that I think we have to explore a bit further or much further in our network and in our research agenda. Who are the subjects of our social? What's our social formation? And we have to, as I think Jody commented the other day, that we must go further. We cannot stick to the categories we have at the moment because they are not helping us. Most of the time they limit our analysis of what is the social and the kind of social formation. And what's the problem? It limits the way we conceive the action of the social movements, or we limit the action of certain social movements. So, the main point for me nowadays is that any social formation at the moment, or the research we have, has shown that every social formation has been very heterogeneous. And I think the greatest or the major challenge for us is how to deal with this heterogeneous subjects, individuals, and heterogeneous institutions. As the NGOs, I think the NGO example is quite nice because it always NGOs, they're connected to completely different actors all over the world, and they bring together the worst and the best, and but also some of the real social forces we have. And I think this is a real research challenge on how to understand this heterogeneity that is constructed under multiple and contradictory trajectories within our countries, but at the international level. And then I come to the last part of my thing today is that how do we think about like the World Social the World Social Forum that was for a long time, it was very promising, and I was discussing to Sandeep before we began that what happened to the World Social Forum nowadays. And in the terms of the social movement I've stated, is what happened to La Via Campesina. Both of this, and there are just two examples, they are so heterogeneous that it has been very difficult for us to think about a common agenda. An agenda that surpasses what Sandip was describing as. And the other day we had this debate on the identitarian politics and possibilities, but I don't think any of these initiatives, the World Social Forum or La Via Campesina, as two examples, have been able to go any further. So, and the other thing, and my last point is, nowadays, in the research I've been doing, especially in South Africa for the last 15 years, what I've been experiencing is that the old kind of gatherings, or the traditional political gatherings we dealt with, parties and other structures we had, have been very difficult to replicate at this moment. And one of the issues is related to the multiple memberships of the members. To be redundant here, but a member of a movement or a member of a party, an academic person like me, nowadays we have multiple memberships. We participate, and that's the thing. Most of the time, like we share our existences into different compartments, and that's something that we have to deal with. And just to conclude, who has been, or what's my inspiration to think about something different? And it's just an inspiration, and there's my inspiration, my contemporary inspiration comes from the so-called feminist coalitions in different parts of the world. I think in the last 50 years at least, and it has to do with my own scholarship. After I began to introduce what was called feminist debates, which I disregard as an identitarian perspective, they have changed the way we can think about solidarity. And why? Because, and I'm coming again to Paris Social Formations the other day, he explained us that triangle, when it comes to gender, it's cross-cut. There's a completely different relation inside that social formation. And what I've been learning from the intense feminist debates I've been participating as a man in the last decade is that because of that heterogeneity of the feminist movements, they had to negotiate a lot. And they advanced a lot of these debates. And in most of the cases, the feminist debates were the places where the challenges we have been discussing here have been faced in a very open way. And then for a certain moment, there's always, the racial issue is always there. But the class issues are always there. And just to conclude, because this is just an inspiration, and then we can talk about this later. One of the most important things I've learned from the feminist coalitions is that in these coalitions, you have women that are in the state and women that are in the social movements at the same time. And they move from one to another. And in most of the cases, they will be also at the NGOs. And these transits have helped to strengthen solidarities across the world. And I think this, I would end up with this and just opening the debate for some sort of inspiring initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelo. Your skepticism is well noted, but also your optimism. Yeah? Thank you very much. You have brought a further set of issues to the table today, which will certainly help us reflect further, yeah, the complexities involved. Max, please.
Thank you, Paris, and thank you, Sandeep and Marcelo, for the presentations. I'm going to primarily discuss Palestine, but going to not discuss Palestine itself very directly, in the sense that I don't want to enter in any discussion about what is Zionism. I consider it an assumption in the room that Zionism is something which needs to be removed from the room. Instead, I want to discuss the tableau of resistance to Zionism, both within northern and southern civil societies, and also outside of civil societies within various state formations. So I'm going to first offer some historical context on what Palestine has meant a bit for the regional resistance movements, but also what it has meant for the imperialists, what the agenda has been vis-a-vis the destruction of Palestine, and how in turn these make their way. Thank you. And how these reverberate in contemporary debates, one of which is, I think, rooted in the national liberation perspective, although the term is not always used, and one of which I think is much more moored in liberal humanist and rights and law approach to the Palestinian cause. And I think the division between these two approaches, which has long been latent and occasionally explicit, has really come to the fore after the October 7th operations. So very briefly, because I think sometimes it's not sufficiently known, I want to sketch the regional tableau. On the imperialist side, there's the US and its neocolonial proxies, namely Jordan, potentially fragile Egypt, the Gulf states, in particular the UAE, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. And within that set, or alongside that set of regional alliances, the agenda of the US has been to raise to the ground the remaining Arab nationalist formations, both as geopolitical actors, as centers of capital, not beholden to US geopolitical imperatives, and as potential organizers of collective political identity and platforms for working class interests. Within this framework, the US goal is de-development, applied successfully to Libya and Iraq, with partial success in Yemen and Syria, although without succeeding in state collapse in either, and in fact, a catastrophic failure for the US agenda in the case of Yemen. With respect to the remaining strategic obstacles, all of this inseparable from the attack on Palestine, US tactics range from sanctions leading to literal starvation, Yemen, Syria, food blockades, Gaza Strip, terror listing of asymmetric armed resistance movements, or insofar as they've taken state power, Yemen, Lebanon, especially Palestine, military occupation in Syria and Iraq, financing sectarian proxies, Syria, also Iraq. These US strategic obstacles are, of course, connected to the Palestinian case insofar as all of them, in fact, defend the Palestinian case to a greater or lesser extent. This, in fact, has long been the case. The entire breadth of pan-Arab parties and states, from Nasserism to Baathism to communism and its anti-Zionist formations, for them, the liberation of Palestine has been inseparable from the broader struggle for unity, development, and national liberation. In this case, we're in the shadow, of course, the defeat of the classic pan-Arab struggle to assist the liberation of Palestine. That is long seen its dusk in many ways, and what instead has dawned is a new regional anti-systemic actor, which is the Iranian nation state, right? And this is actually the main mooring for the Palestinian and regional national resistance, right? So the anchor, the Islamic Republic of Iran, is the child of the 1979 revolution, with all of its lights and shadows, which is carried out partially endogenous industrialization process, very much linked to Russia and Iran, has built up a capacity for defensive militarization, has a flawed but existent domestic welfare state, and what it offers is capital for regional movements in the context of the raising of alternative poles, namely Iraq and Libya, 2, diplomatic support, 3, military training, and 4, what scholars have called the possibility of weapons. Right? Alongside Iran, we've seen a further ascension of other movements or parties within this axis of resistance. The Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, which largely destroyed the Gulf-funded ISIS, with strong support of Iran, Soleimani, Hezbollah, which expelled and resisted Israel in 2000 and again in 2006, Syria having been a logistical corridor, and Ansar Allah, or often known as wrongly as the Houthis, which really emerged as a powerful actor starting in 2014 when they marched into the capital. I think actually this is the main embodiment of the Arab Spring. This was actually a disciplined, armed movement organized in a party formation, which marched into a capital and actually took state power in very much classic revolution, right? And this has increasingly since 2004 moved to an ever sharper rhetoric of anti-imperialism and anti-colonialism with some sectarian elements, economically moving in the direction of populism and with an orientation increasingly towards centralized economic planning. That is, this is a classic anti-imperialist populist movement with an extremely strong anti-colonial, almost millenarian anti-colonial perspective, especially towards the liberation of Palestine. So Hamas, and to a lesser extent, Islamic Jihad, have relied on that backbone for arms, training, logistics. And from 2000, and especially 2006, the two Hezbollah victories against Israel gave a great legitimacy to armed resistance in the Palestinian population, which even grew even stronger in 2014 with the failed Israeli attack on the Gaza Strip, including which saw elite Palestinian units repelling and ambushing elite Israeli units, right? The strength of this operation actually foreclosed for a long time the possibility of a reasonably priced ground invasion, right? And within this weakened sovereignty envelope, right, which I think is correct, it might seem odd, but I think it's correct to describe it that way in the Gaza Strip, this both reinforced and was reinforced by defensive militarization and even a kind of import substitution industrialization-based weapons manufacturing, right, which is actually the primary basis of the current resistance operations. The Great Flood of October 7 was indeed only possible with and against the context of those forces. So very briefly, most of you know what happened in some way or another on October 7th. It was based on an armed and organized force of up to 40,000, perhaps more, armed fighters. They took over 200 prisoners of war, and it was a success which I think went well beyond what the Palestinian forces imagined was possible. They did not imagine they would have such success, and the Israeli defensive installations would collapse so quickly. It was also a sovereign Palestinian position that occurred without really the major knowledge of the surrounding logistical axis, right? So immediately produced two poles in the region itself, right? Within, on the one side, you saw from Hezbollah a war of attrition, which has been ongoing on the northern border. A massively escalating solidarity from Yemen, now escalating to a blockade of Israeli, American, and British ships, including there's increasingly hot war. And there's also the Popular Mobilization Forces, which are targeting US bases and drones to Israel. And West Bank in Palestine has also seen an armed insurgency, which is tying down portions of the Israeli military forces. With respect to Gaza, there has been a massive ground and air bombardment. The aim has been the uprooting of Hamas, the restoring of deterrence, the recovery of the hostages. At our current day, there are 27,000 officially counted as dead, with the serious estimates at around 35,000, well over 70,000 injuries. Now, this veracity, which has now become a genocide, stems from two sources. One is that Gaza offered no bank of targets big enough to kind of salve the Israeli ego to restore its deterrence. But I think even more to the point, there's an interplay between the failure of the military and political goals of genocide. Right? One leads into the other, right? There has been a catastrophic failure for the Israelis of any of their political or military goals. They have not been able to reach them. Meanwhile, as of today or yesterday, I believe, they announced they had destroyed less than 20% of the tunnels. So given that this is Israel, you divide that number by half, right? So what this means is that there's actually been a complete failure on the kinetic or the military plane of this war of counterinsurgency against the Palestinian population, which is why Israel is now basically resorting to open siege warfare. It's going to the murder of groupments of unarmed Palestinian men who have nothing to do with Hamas. And also the aerial bombardment, right? This has produced, I think, now two forms or two poles of solidarity, right? This is where, sorry for the long sketch of the regional landscape. I just wanted to be clear about where I'm coming from in terms of how I see things. One of them, of course, is widespread in the north, but bleeds into the south and also bleeds even into the Arab region through a variety of modalities of intellectual, cultural co-optation, including northern funding agencies or funding agencies routed through the Arab Gulf capitalist classes, right? And this is especially, of course, in the intellectual and NGO levels. This is a discourse that what is occurring in Palestine is a mass killing, but it rests on casting Palestine as an experience primarily of victimization, right? And this call is essentially coupled with a call for a ceasefire, right? But it relies actually essentially on a delegitimization of the armed elements in the Palestinian resistance. It cannot recognize that, right? Because of for a variety of reasons, because of the bourgeois nature of the platforms themselves that are producing cultural material or ideological material for this pole solidarity, also because of the degree of intellectual counterinsurgency against support for Zionism, right? Also to a large degree, the Islamophobia and kind of the overall engorgement of the Western left itself, right? A different pole is the armed solidarity from the regional armed right? The states of Iran, Syria, especially Yemen, and also popular militia. I've discussed this already, but I think it can be emphasized or re-emphasized that Yemen is actually carrying out an internationalism that, at least for me, is recalling Cuba and Angola, and may have single-handedly prevented the U.S. entrance to the Gaza theater, right? By actually really putting out showing what would the consequences be, especially on Emirati and Saudi oil installations and the intended consequences for world oil prices and the world economy. Right? Now, that solidarity is enormously popular, in fact, in the Arab region. Amongst popular classes, almost without saying, and large portions of the professional classes outside of the spheres of certain spheres of cultural production and reproduction. This is activated, I think, a wide-scale emotional and sometimes political support for anti-colonial activity for a period. There were mass demonstrations. Tunisia saw the largest demonstrations since the revolution, I believe, and a form of solidarity, or just say pan-Arab sentiment rather than solidarity, although often without organizational expression, which itself is a reflection of the continued dual forks of widespread neo-colonial dictatorship on the one hand, and on the other hand, civil society, neo-colonial NGO counterinsurgency, with a huge mechanism of disorientation in the Arab region after what this event that people call the Arab Spring. But at the same time, nor has the West actually been uniform, right? There's actually a rising alternative pole, which is coming from students, which is coming from exile organizers and so forth, right? And which is coming from the hard left within the West, which is actually working against the specter, working against the political fraction of what's essentially fascist mechanisms used to regulate speech, right? You can't give a talk like I just gave in Britain. I believe you would immediately face like a political prosecution. The people who sponsor you could get arrested. That's just an example, right? You literally can't say this. Right. And of course, in Germany, if you actually say you're in solidarity with Palestine, this is constituted as anti-Semitism and so forth, right? These are actually fascist expressions of regulation of freedom of speech, right? But nevertheless, I mean, there is still sentiment, especially I would say probably in the United States, where for historical reasons, you have some sort of freedom of expression in certain ways, where there is a solidarity with Yemen, which is actually activating the youth on a mass scale in the United States. Of course, it goes without saying in the Arab region, and also with the Palestinian armed resistance. Now, this is not just, the reason these divides are important, right? Is that one is that the first pole is actually not in any sort of accountable relationship, let alone kind of accepting the political protagonism of the Palestinian liberation movement itself, or the larger Arab liberation movement that is the regional cradle for the Palestine liberation movement. right? It also tends to drop the prisoner release demands, which is something that's absolutely essential as a historical demand of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, but is very largely not sufficiently present in the demands of large scale of a lot of the Western civil society movements, right? The prisoners don't actually exist. Though there's 10,000 prisoners right now in the prisons, and actually the war turns on the terms for a ceasefire actually in turn on prisoner releases from the Israeli dungeons, right? But these are actually not present, right? So it actually leads to a political tableau that is unfavorable for the negotiating position of the Palestinian forces that are seeking some sign of just release, just end to the war. So these are some of the contexts in which I Tunisia, not in the United States, but nevertheless working with and against and trying to navigate these contexts. And I think it's also helpful for our collective work that we understand both the Western and also the Arab contexts and figure out, of course, for those of you in either of those regions, how your own context fit into this and how we can collectively build together to strengthen the more radical goals within our movements.
Thank you, Max. Indeed, the Arab Spring, as you well noted, has not ended, and its most potent anti-imperialist and progressive elements continue to evolve and take power in one country, which is Yemen. And I think that is something that we need to take into our perspective. Yeah, that it's not an outlier or an inorganic phenomenon of this last decade or two, but it is actually the protagonist, the key result, yeah, of a series of rebellions which led to invasion in the case of Libya, war without end in Syria, coups, yeah, in Egypt, and finally a force that instills new momentum, yeah, into Yemen itself, but also in international solidarity, like no one else has done. So this is also I wish to express also own appreciation and solidarity with the great sacrifices that the Yemeni people are making. Marcin, are you there?
Yes. Can you
Please,
hear me?
Yes, please. You have 15 minutes as well.
Yes. I will take less than that.
All right. Please.
Thank you, Paris and Sandeep, Marcelo, and Max for raising so many issues. I will also raise some issues on the issues that have been raised so far. And since it's a round table, I hope to open up the discussion from my own perspective, which is a perspective not only of an academic sitting in the university, but as an activist of one of the largest women's organizations, or the largest women's organization in the country with a left orientation, and as an activist of the organized left movement, and which is meant to have an internationalist perspective. Now, the topic for today is international solidarity 70 years after Bandung. And the first question that comes to my mind is, even from a feminist perspective, as Marcelo had said, is solidarity for whom and what kind of solidarity are we talking about? What kind of solidarity? For me, this is a very important issue, and it goes right back to the Bandung legacy. I think the Bandung legacy is not one legacy, firstly. The Bandung legacy can be read in different ways. The same way as we read Nehru and his emphasis on the independence of the nation state and non-alignment. In the same way, I also read Rao and Rai's important intervention in the Bandung conference, which basically had a slightly different emphasis. And it not only raised the issue of anti-imperialism and independence, but it also raised the issue of the state of the working classes within the newly independent countries, thus raising the prospect of seeing the Bandung legacy from a distinctively class perspective. And this perspective was not only the perspective of Rao and Rai. There were many speeches in the Bandung. I'm only talking about it because I've been going through some of the Bandung documents in my own research on the internationalist perspectives within the Indian women's movement and the impact of the internationalist perspective on the Indian women's movement. Yeah. So, in fact, if you look at the Indian women's movement, it probably read and participated in the Bandung in two completely different ways. Yeah. On the one hand, you had the pre-Bandung alliance of the International Women's Organization called the International Alliance of Women. And on the other hand, you had the more radical and militant alliances under the World International Democratic Federation. And we should be clear that the International Alliance of Women had within its leadership a pan-Indian group called the Women's India Association, which was a precursor to the All India Women's Conference, formed in the interwar years. And this conference encompassed within, again, different trends of feminism. Why I'm emphasizing this is because I think that the strategy for solidarity is linked to our perspective of the world that we want. And our perspective of the world that we want is also linked to our politics to some extent. Yeah. And so the International Alliance of Women was a collaborator with the League of Nations. The All India Women's Conference was a supporter of the newly independent state. And there was a split in that conference in 1960, in 1952, just before Bandung. And you had the formation of the communist-oriented National Federation of Indian Women. Yes, why I'm raising this issue is because the question of what type of internationalism was harbored or sort of internalized through the Bandung legacy is something that I think we need to discuss, research, and debate more, even in order to clarify our political and activist positions. That's number one. The second thing that I want to raise is that when we are talking about, when at least I'm talking about internationalism, which is largely a authoritarian internationalism that I'm talking about, a socialist internationalism, then according to me, as Sandeep himself has been pointing out in his own intervention, this internationalism, and since I work in a working class women's organization, I'd like to say that this internationalism starts with changing or combating the hegemony at the ground. Because the movement for internationalism, the proletarian internationalism in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, by the Indian women's movement, was built through the working class movement. It was not built outside the working class movement. The women's organizations outside the working class movement largely followed the non-alignment independence path, which is not a bad path. I don't think that they're actually contradictory also. They can be complementary also with the paths. Whereas the working class, where Nehru and the others talked of world peace, but we should know that the new Indian government was the one that stopped the World Peace Conference led by progressive organizations in India, both the Women's Conference and the All India Peace Organizations Conference in India. So, peace as non-alignment or a wider perspective on peace is something that I think we also need to sort of raise the issue about that. And we see that even in the 70s on the issue of Vietnam, for example, or on the issue of Korea, for example. You know, there was a very famous report in the 70s called We Accuse. It was a report that was brought out by the Women's International Democratic Federation, participated by countries of Latin America, Asia, and Africa, which documented the horrors of American imperialism, not only in terms of war and peace, but also in terms of its impact on the most oppressed sections of the women. Yeah, and by the way, the Indian women's leadership was part of that report. One of the women actually led the delegation to Korea. And this kind of internationalism is, I think, what we're looking towards. Now, let me just fast forward to make my last point, which is that what implications this had for the women's movement in India from the 70s and 80s onwards. Yeah, and especially with the with neoliberal globalization. In particular,
Do it in 5 minutes?
yes,
Okay.
I can do it in 5 minutes. In particular, I'm referring to the NGO forum in Horairu in near Beijing. That's the parallel conference to the 4th Women's Conference of the United Nations. In that, actually, the radical women's, the communist women's organizations took up the lead to build a consensus on structural adjustment program and forced the UN Women's official draft to change. 98 women's organizations made a common platform called Towards Beijing in Delhi in 1995. The original document was by the All India Democratic Women's Association called Structural Transformation structural adjustment or structural transformation. And on the basis of that document, some international consensus was built in the Beijing document, at least amongst the Asians. So the point that I'm trying to make is that, in fact, the working class internationalism, it found a greater influence by the 90s within the women's movement. And I think we should be very clear that the types of women's organizations, not only communists, but even others who aligned with that kind of internationalism, internationalist perspective, I would not say that they were all international solidarity organizations and all this, were people who were forced to acknowledge the impact of what Paris calls genderized semi-authoritarianization within the country. So I just wanted to make these few points to basically highlight the diversity within internationalist perspectives and within the reading of Bandung itself for the women and the countries of Asia. I'll just stop there. I'm already
Thank you
taking
so
a lot of
much,
time.
Archana. Thank you. Thank you. We await, Archana, very eagerly, this paper of yours that you know, which is coming out. It's coming out in this next issue of Hungarian South. Archana is not only a member of the leadership of the All India Democratic Women's Organization, but she's also been in charge of reorganizing the archives of the organization. And much of this detailed disposition that she has brought today is the result of these recent research initiatives, and will be published. In fact, in the full form that you will be published very soon in our journal. So thank you very much, Archana. Thank you. Okay, so we have let's say 20 minutes because we do have another panel afterwards. So let's open the floor. Please be succinct in your questions or comments, and let's do a round, and then allow our panelists to respond very briefly once again. These are issues, of course, that are very big, and we don't need to try to put an end to this debate today. Of course, it's the opening of the debate. Okay, so please, who would like to speak? Everyone. Okay, so Bernardo, then Josie, then I think it's yeah. Okay, please, Bernardo. Is that working?
Yes.
There we go.
Thanks for the presentations. They were very, very good, and I think they showed us the differences in trying to reach solidarity in the third world. And my question is has the same sense that I'd really like to see what each one of you got to say, like how this, especially Max, regarding the Muslim solidarity, how did that emerge on our context today of the financialized capitalism? Why those were the answers? Why those were the materializations of the struggle? If you guys have any idea? Each one of you can respond in your own way, right? That's what I'd like to do.
Thank you, Bernardo. Josie, please. And you.
Yeah, we don't need it.
Thank you so much for such an an engaging panel. I'm sorry I missed most of what Sandeep said, but something he said struck me, and I wanted to ask him about it. Maybe he did talk about it before. So I was struck when he talked about the growing antagonisms among progressive social formation, and this is in just one country. And I was wondering, what does this imply for prosecuting common struggles against dictatorship and austerity in that country? But then also questions of international solidarity on issues such as climate change, imperialism, and so on. What do you suggest is a way in which to navigate these antagonisms? I wanted to ask Marcelo about his intervention about heterogeneity, because I found it disturbing on two counts. Not because what he's saying is not true, that these are very heterogeneous social formations and so on, that it raises all kinds of complications. There are two things that disturbed me at this. One, Marcelo was saying that he spoke in terms of being an intellectual, so he's positioning himself as distinct from Sandeep, and he's interested in a research agenda. And I found that dichotomy problematic. Many of us see ourselves as scholar activists. We may work in universities, but we are bona fide members of movements as well. Isn't that a vantage point that should change the way in which we think about heterogeneity? Secondly, I thought that it was paralyzing the way you talked about the implications of heterogeneity for struggles and solidarities. And I feel that as long as national states do exist and they are vectors of oppression, then what's the problem with having a dual lens? Because are we saying that La Via Campesina or whoever have to be perfect for us to say that these are formations that are trying to represent oppressed people, and that we should engage with them critically, whilst supporting the fact that they are representatives of the social forces that we are most interested in supporting. And in that sense, I was surprised by your very positive response to the feminist movement. As a member of that movement, I really think that it has shown the way, in the ways in which that one navigates heterogeneity. At the same time, the feminist movement shows the limitations of navigating heterogeneity in various ways. It's a very broad church, and a large part of it is in the hands of liberal feminists. And basically that limits what its revolutionary agenda could be at any point in time. I'm sorry. I wanted to ask Mark some questions because I'm really interested. I wanted further information from you. I was interested in the thinking in the Arab world and among Palestinians about the two-state solution in light of what's happening in Gaza. And in that sense, what is seen in the Arab streets these days as a just settlement of the Palestinian cause. And secondly, I also wondered what you thought, how we should think about the dissonance between the strength of protests and solidarities in the streets of the West when you compare to the intransigence of Western governments. What should that tell us about the nature of solidarity? Thank you.
Very much.
Hello,
Thank you, Georgie. Lucas, please.
is it on? Yeah. So hello everyone, good afternoon. I have a quick question, which is related to what Georgie just said. Well, we all know that the labor reserves of the South are being exported to the North. I have this friend who just came back from the UK, and which, of course, as Max says, there is a strong Zionist stronghold that you cannot speak freely about the issues concerning the liberation of Palestine. But then there was this huge mass mobilizations in the streets of London And this friend has said that by his perspective, of course, the bulk of these mass mobilizations were Africans and Indians and Jamaicans of London. So my question for all of you is if you can, how do you think is the relation between race and imperialism, and of course, anti-imperialist solidarity, especially in regards to this new phenomenon, which is the brown and black labor populations of the world.
Thank you, Lucas. Anyone else? Please.
Sorry, I can listen to the last part of it.
Just say your
Yes.
name. Say your name.
Hi, Emilia. Okay.
Like Emily.
Yes, I find my. Well, I was to say some things about the feminist movement. Well, like Jojo say, we have a lot of limits in the movement. I see that, for example, the fight in Argentina for legal abortion. After that, the movement is more fragmented. For example, we fight with a goal in mind, and then now we fight inside a movement because we don't agree the way we must take it now. It's difficult because I see difference in inside movement because of the class burdens. So this is very crucial inside the feminist movement. Women from popular sector ask for things very different for women from media class, and this is difficult to join to another fight. So, and the movement, at least what I see in the debates and in all the assemblies that we have, it isn't so anti-capitalist. Is very heterogeneous, and the more radical part is something difficult. We need a lot of discussion at the same time. For example, we want to impose a law about healthcare that I said the other time, and we can find the enough strength to implement. So the Congress just forgot the law, this project of law. I see the limit of the movement in this kind of things.
Thanks so much, Amelia. I think we're really pushing the time here, so I would prefer, unless there's anyone else that really wants to raise a hand, I would prefer that we come back to the table and give 3 minutes to each one to close, because really we are at the end of the panel. Can we do it in 3 minutes each? Yes, okay. Let's start the other way around. Archana, would you like to go first, please? Archana?
Yes, hello. So I'll be very brief. I think Comrade Georgie has actually hit the nail on the head when she's talking about the differences and the ways of also cooperating within the feminist movement. But I feel that the revolutionary potential of certain types of feminist movements doesn't preclude it from, and I think she would agree with me also, doesn't preclude it from cooperating with others, because essentially the feminist movement at a very broad level is largely an anti-establishment movement, because it's fighting structures of patriarchy which are very ingrained within both the society and the state. So it depends on how far which movement wants to go in terms of espousing the rights and articulating the rights. Of course, on my own part, and I would obviously tend towards a different trajectory. So I don't think, as I said, reformist internationalism and revolutionary proletarian internationalism are entirely incompatible with each other. What is incompatible? The difference arises on the question of strategy and the perception of an anti-imperialist and not always non-capitalists for other types of organizations, but an anti-imperialist world. And that has to be negotiated, and it will have to be negotiated from time to counter things. Secondly, I also agree with the argument that, the dichotomy between activism and research and scholarship is very problematic. In my experience, being an activist has in fact enriched my research and the other way around also. So that's the other thing. The third thing was about Muslim solidarity and brotherhood. There was one question on Muslim solidarity and brotherhood, which I think I'd rather leave to Max. But the way I see it, I think you have to see the trajectory of this. Again, what kind of solidarity and what kind of brotherhood? Anti-imperialism of what kind? I would raise a question to that. Race, class, all these things. I think if you were to have a truly internationalist perspective, then you would have to work with your cadres to overcome those differences. Otherwise, you cannot have a truly internationalist perspective. The contradictions within the movement, we have to find a way of resolving them. They're very, very important contradictions, but we have to find a way of resolving them. And I have no easy answers to that. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Archana. Max, please. 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna try. First, why were Islamic struggles the answer to the struggle and contemporary financialized imperialism? I think the basic answer is that there was a revolution in the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it was able to offer support to a wide range of struggles that were partially on sectarian grounds, partially by circumstances of history, partially because the forces in the surrounding states surrounding Israel were the ones that were able to receive support from Iran and entered inevitable contradiction with Israel, largely because of the US-sponsored and Saudi-sponsored destruction of the left above all as secular Arab nationalism, as an anti-systemic project. And so this really left the field to Iran to primarily be able to offer weapons to the poor, essentially, to not just resist Israel, but also to resist ISIS, which of course extensively funded by the Gulf states, proof of connivance between ISIS and France. And so forth. So I think this is the basic answer to it. In terms of, and there's a lot of, I don't know. The question about the two-state solution in light of the situation. I mean, my sense is that, of course, within the Arab world, and Israel is widely considered fundamentally illegitimate in its totality, right? I think you have larger percentages or smaller percentages of people kind of saying what will accept something that will stop a war or give people a decent life, depending on the severity of what Israel's doing. I think right now, Israel is very much seared, not just into the Arab populations, but also a lot of people think as something deeply irredeemable, right? That cannot have that doesn't have a future simply because the images that have circulated have really, I think, shifted a lot of people's willingness to accept some form of interim arrangement. An interim arrangement could be arrived at basically through, if there was a defanging of Hamas, basically. I mean, the question of within Palestine itself, how a two-state solution, I mean, I don't know. The answer isn't the question. I mean, of course, everyone sees Israel as illegitimate, but would people accept a bad resolution? Maybe, but would Israel accept a bad resolution? Never. So it's just, it's not a question that is really, I think, on the agenda. I do think this last one, just 20 seconds. The distance between the strength of protests in contrast to the entrenchments of the Western governments. I mean, I think there's a rising perception amongst, it's feeding an already existent perception, because there is leftism. It's more popular amongst youth, and not just youth in the West. I mean, it's feeding like a perception that Western liberal democracy is a sham, right? That the traditional institutions and parties of essentially containment, like the Democratic Party and Labour Party, are incapable of articulating popular demands, right? And that in fact the institutions themselves are quite rotten. And I think it fuels a radical critique of the existing system.
Marcelo.
Thank you. And thank you very much, Georgie and Emilio. I'll speak to your questions because, first, I would like to say that, and it was very good to hear from you both and from Archana. That's, this is a man talking about the social movement. And that's my point, why I think the feminist movement and its heterogeneity is so inspiring, because every woman that is an intellectual is always an activist, every one of them. And but it doesn't happen to certain people, and I include myself. In the way we work, my point is we should work as and try to understand the advantage of being a feminist intellectual, and understand that it's a movement by itself. My point about the heterogeneity, I think you both, and I thank you very much for your clarifications, is the heterogeneity for me is a sort of methodological problem, but it's a good problem in a way that it helps us to advance the way we think about solidarity. Emilia mentioned the abortion in Argentina, and you know what's the biggest protest in Brazil nowadays is what we call the Daisies March, is the Margaridas March, which brings 100,000 women to the streets once a year, and different. And I think that you both exposed, and that's when I got to learn a movement with different fractions and expressions that has it both within the movement and intellectually expressed publicly the disagreements in order to build something else in the feminist debates. And that's my whole point. And that's why I said I don't have problems with La Via Campesina. I think it's interesting, but one of the issues in us is not to discuss publicly the differences and the limits of the liberal agendas. As I said, of course, all social movements, I would say, in my perspective, are always in trouble with the liberal agendas. But I think in the way it has been mobilized within, and that's the thing, that the feminist movement is a movement that doesn't need a membership. And it goes far beyond what most of us have learned about social movements. And we always think about like membership and things. And I think what has happened is that, and what I've learned from my colleagues, is that even when you have to deal and you have to struggle against liberal agendas, you learn something. And my point is, part of the solidarity is to learn from each other. And I think in most of the other social movements I have been studying, there's a sort of insulation instead of opening towards this I would say, learning practice, and I would end up like that, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Marcelo. Please, Sadiq.
I want to first go to the question of Muslim solidarity. I want to say it's contextual. But if I reflect, we have 11% of our large population which are Muslims. And the way I see this solidarity, if I may use that word, in the last several decades, but more particularly the last decade, I would think it is under severe battering for the reasons I said earlier, and I'm not sort of imagining this is the talk in India, under very severe persecution and battering, that there is a genesis of a coming together as if to save lives. Yeah. And I think the danger is the reactionary tendencies. So I really do not see that in any other space at this moment under great duress, existential survivalist, that kind of a story. The temples are being built and mosques are being demolished. So there's that context that I think is important to keep in mind. I'm not generalized very quickly on the other one, but Josie was asking. I think what Archana said at some stage, I'll begin there. Combating hegemonies is an act of the ground, and that is the necessary, if I may use the word, building block of any form of solidarity, whether among progressive forces or internationally. And that's the way we've sort of seen it. India vis-a-vis Bandung in the last 70 years. Now coming to let's say not left of center and left kind of political formations in India, parties, if you say. Well, I mean, the point is, their cadres are not contesting hegemony. Their cadres in what Max was speaking to in liberal democracies are from election to election, are largely not there. And on the other hand, the constituencies are not driving solidarity. So in the end, it's that solidarity is essentially an action to survive for the parties, an action to be relevant in the elections, a fight there. So it's a political survival game, the liberal democracy that progressive parties are into, center and center left. If you take it left, of course, has a distinct. I'll not go entire left, but that center space, social democrat and center space, which also is a part of minimalist part of what we need. I think that's what I would say. I think these are the two, right?
Thank you, Sadiq. Thank you. Well, I'm personally pleased that with the way the debate has gone, we have taken a step further with the reflections. It gave us enough elements to keep circulating in our minds, processing as we move forward and contemplate on how to organize a celebration and to make a leap, in this debate next year. So thank you very much. We have in the session, we have coffee and tea now. Yeah, upstairs. Is it upstairs?
No, it's downstairs.
It's downstairs.
After the reception.
After the reception.
I think.
Okay, and we'll be back in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Archana.